Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Priscillia Charles, and I'm delighted to be joined by a special guest today in Studio 2, Kathrin Bussmann. Hi, Kathrin.
Hi, Priscillia. It's a pleasure to join you on VistaTalks.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We're delighted. And so for those of you who wouldn't know Kathrin yet, but I'm sure a large part of our audience knows you, Kathrin is a fellow podcast host and global business strategist. Kathrin is president and chief strategist as Verbatim, host of the Worldly Marketer podcast, and also head of content localization as Bubble. So we're going to start and get to know you for our audience who wouldn't yet, and maybe dig into your academic background that is quite impressive, I have to say. And also maybe talk first, let's jump into LOC Worldwide 43 that just took place January 27 and January 28th. So did you attend the online event yourself?
I did, yeah. We're speaking on January 29th, so it just ended. Yeah, I attended LOC Worldwide 43 and I thought it was very successful. I can tell from the last LOC Worldwide, the 42nd edition, that, the organizers learn things every time they have to do this virtually and are improving, right, on the previous edition. And so this time around, I thought the platform they selected was very robust and worked really well. At least it did for me. I can't speak for everybody else, but that worked really well. I thought the quality of the sessions was really great. And I mean, clearly what they decided to do this time around was pre-record all the sessions. Because I know last time what happened was some of the sessions, people were presenting live in the moment and maybe their internet connection was kind of spotty, and so there were some technical difficulties with some of the sessions last time. And I think to avoid that, this is what I'm guessing, to avoid that, they decided to just have everybody, all the speakers, pre-record everything to make sure that everything was coming across perfectly and
Yes.
everyone could hear and see everything properly. And so that, I think that helped. And I mean, at the end of the day, all the sessions are going to be available to watch later anyway. So this idea of recording everything is not a bad idea at all. And it kind of serves the purpose. And they still had live Q&As, which I really enjoyed, and live networking.
Yeah, that's very engaging for everyone attending, I suppose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And with all these fantastic global organizations attending. So and I'd like to move on to your impressive background as academic background, as I mentioned, because you studied communications, then linguistics at the University of Ottawa, Canada, but you also hold a PhD in the same field. So I don't want to butcher the name, from Humboldt University of Berlin in Germany, if I'm not mistaken. That's really impressive. So really, I should be calling you Dr. Bussmann if I'm.
You don't have to do that, but yes, you could. Whenever I'm in Austria, people they're very big on titles like that. So I do get called Dr. Bussmann whenever I'm in Austria. It's kind of funny.
So tell me, why did you decide to pursue this particular field and up into a PhD level? And I mean, is it because is it related to your multicultural background? I understand you grew up speaking 3 different languages.
Yeah, so I was born in Canada, but more specifically in Quebec. So as you know, Quebec is the French-speaking province in Canada. French is the official language of Quebec. And my parents had literally just immigrated to Quebec from Germany. Okay. So they arrived like a month earlier. And I was born. So I have dual citizenship because of that, Canadian by birth and German through my parents. And so I grew up speaking German at home, French outside the home, including at school. And I kind of learned English, I guess, as a third language. I can't remember learning it. I basically, it was baked in. All 3 languages were baked in basically from the time I was born. So I was exposed to all 3 more or less equally, but like in very different environments. So I don't remember learning any of them, but I learned them all kind of equally well, and also reading and writing them. So that, I think that's rather unique. Like, I don't come across a lot of people who have a chance to learn 3 languages simultaneously like that. But it really, to me, it sort of baked in this idea that multilingual a multilingual flow is sort of a totally natural thing. And I also kind of became quite aware of how when I switched between languages, or at least as a child, this was more the case, I would also switch a bit, well, my mentality almost. Like it was almost like I was kind of becoming a different person in each of my three languages, in part because of the context, right? So French was more the social kind of context at school with my friends. And then, you know, with my parents, it was all sort of family stuff, and because all my relatives are still in Germany. So we would visit them very, very often. And then English was sort of more the language of society at large, you know, the media. I was watching a lot of English language television. And of course, being just north of the US, we got all the American pop culture in our media in Canada as well. So yeah, so to me, being multilingual, multicultural is just sort of the most natural thing in the world. And so that naturally kind of made me pursue, I guess, communication studies, which at the time when this was in the early 90s, communication studies back then was really a theory of mass media, at least at the University of Ottawa it was. And so, you know, print, the theory behind mass print, mass radio, and television, and the internet was not really on the radar yet in terms of, you know, being a mass medium. So when I look back now, it all seems very quaint, right? Things have changed so much since then, it's ridiculous. But then while I was studying that, I took some linguistics courses as optional courses, and I totally fell in love. I was like, oh, this is what I wanted. This is what I want to pursue. It's so interesting. And I didn't even know this field existed, right? Linguistics. Now, Ottawa U also has a translation department. And I know a lot of people in my family kind of always thought I might pursue translation as a career, but I have to say that was never my vocation. Like I really believe strongly that it has to be a vocation. Like I know a lot of translators, and if it's not your vocation, you're probably not going to stick with it, right? It really does need to be something that you are passionate about. And it was never my passion to become a translator, but I love languages, and I love the culture that comes with the language, and the differences between languages and cultures are fascinating to me, and the history of languages, which is what I actually pursued in the field of linguistics. I went into historical linguistics and historical phonology, which is the study of speech sounds. So it gets really granular. So, and because I have a lot of academics in my family, including my father was a professor at the university where I grew up. He was a professor of physics. And so to me, academia was just sort of the almost like the default thing. Yeah, this is what you like. If you don't know what else to do with your life, just become an academic. So I kind of pursued that, and it was going well, and I kept getting scholarships. So I kept thinking, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then, and because I have dual citizenship, I thought, well, it would be really cool to go do my PhD in Germany. So I picked Humboldt Universität in Berlin because they had a really solid program and some really interesting professors in historical linguistics. And that was a really, really good experience. But it was also like a process. Doing a PhD was a process that was, that kind of taught me that at the end of the day, I want to do something a little more practical and a little less ivory towerish, shall we say, because historical linguistics is fascinating, but it's also, there's not a lot of practical applications, you know, in the here and now, you know, how does this help people right now with problems they're actually trying to solve? So by the end of this process of completing my PhD, I was kind of ready to see what else I could do besides becoming an academic. And it sort of coincided with me kind of settling in Toronto with my family, a family of my own, started my family and had my daughter, and it just, the time just seemed right to focus on that for some years. So I took some time off to just raise my daughter, and by the time I was ready to go back out into the workforce, I'd sort of not burned my academic bridges, but let them kind of dry up, I guess you could say. So I was ready to try something different, and I was trying to figure out, okay, how can I take the skills I have, you know, this being trilingual, having an affinity for cultural and linguistic issues, and how can I apply that to the real world in a practical way that lets me kind of build a business around that. And so that's when I launched Verbicino in 2014.
I was going to come to this. Thanks for the very smooth transition, should I say. That's exactly my next point. You're president and chief strategist, as we mentioned, at Verbicino. And Verbicino is an international marketing consultancy that empowers the global brands of tomorrow. And you help digital-first B2B companies to go smart in a smart, strategic way. So tell us a little bit about the organization or about your consultancy. What type of services do you offer and you specialize in?
So it's a strategic consultancy. So I focus on creating strategies specifically for content marketing in a context where a company is ready to go global for the first time. And of course, we know that that means not global everywhere, but global, starting with one market, one foreign market, and then maybe the next one and the next one. So in a very calculated and well-informed way. But as a company expands internationally for the first time, they will realize that the content marketing strategy that they've been using in their domestic market and that may have worked really well for them doesn't necessarily translate, pardon the pun, well into the foreign market that they're trying to enter. So at that point, they need to kind of take a step back and think, okay, how are we going to do this? We obviously can't just sort of copy and paste our current approach. What are the things we have to think about? Like we've never done this before. What are the issues that can come up? Who are the experts we need to kind of talk to and maybe outsource some of this work to? And just because you don't know what you don't know when you're just starting out, right? So I'm looking to work with digital first companies that are in the early stages of scaling up internationally, or who maybe they're already they have a foot in international, but they kind of are realizing that maybe the resources that they have in-house are not really specialized enough to handle these new challenges that they're encountering. And they just need someone to be kind of the connector basically between their business goals and the specialists that they are going to need to make those business goals happen.
Yeah.
So I see myself as a connector because I as I kind of just explained, I didn't start out in the localization field. I started out in academia, communication studies, linguistics. Then when I launched my business, I started focusing on content marketing because I realized just by doing my own marketing myself for my business that if you don't know how to market your business, no one's going to know you even exist. So you need to pay attention to your marketing strategy and then also really get to know your target market. Be clear on who your target market is and then plan your content marketing accordingly. Okay. So I've done this for my own business, Verbicino. And so in a B2B context, I also discovered that for global marketing, localization comes into the picture. And it was frankly a revelation to me. I like to say that localization is probably the best kept secret for global business success because from my perspective, as someone who has just kind of come into the localization space, back in 2014, I had never heard, I've always been interested in language and culture, and I had literally never heard of the localization industry until I stumbled across it myself, just because I was starting to talk to people and starting to network and starting to build, my own knowledge in global marketing. And I thought, how can this be? How did I not know about this fascinating, really, really cool industry with all these really, really cool people in it? If I'd known about it, back in my university days, I probably would have just made a beeline for that. And I would have studied that and I would have, gotten started 20 years ago. So, but, better late than never. And now my mission is really to kind of make sure that localization gets on people's radar, the people who really need to know about it and who need to understand it better. and who probably need to become clients of the localization industry, and then help them navigate it, because it is a bit, for someone who doesn't have a background in languages or translation, it can be a little bit intimidating and a little bit yeah, a little bit confusing at times. If you don't speak the jargon, you don't know the lingo, you haven't been to conferences like Loc World, there's a really steep learning curve.
Yeah.
And so I think for startups and scale ups and SMEs who are just starting to internationalize, it can be intimidating. And I think I'm in a good position to be that person who can be the connector between your brand, your business goals, and the localization industry and global marketing industry, who will be the people who have the specialists to take you to where you're trying to get.
Absolutely, yeah. And through your podcast, you're also you connect people together, and you put localization industry on the radar for everyone who is looking to expand or to get to know localization experts and marketing experts. So obviously, so we can't mention Verbaccino without mentioning the Wordly Marketer podcast. And I mean, it's a very impressive record of interviews that you have. I see 210, if I'm not incorrect. How was it born? Why the idea of this podcast in the first place?
So I'm a huge fan of podcasts as a medium. I love listening to podcasts. I don't have as much time now as I used to listen to them, but I find if you find the right ones, they're extremely educational. It's amazing the quality of content that you can find if you take the time to search. And there's something for everyone, right? So when I was starting my business, I was looking for podcasts that could teach me about, running my own business, marketing, all these different topics that I still had a lot to learn. And we all always have a lot to learn, but there's some really, really fantastic podcasts out there by really top level, thought leaders, certainly in the marketing industry and, in business. And so when it took me a while, but when I finally figured out that my niche was going to be content marketing for global growth, I started looking for podcasts that were talking about that kind of issue, right? That the issues that come up when you're planning a global content strategy. And I couldn't find a podcast like that. I couldn't find a podcast about global marketing, literally, which I found very strange, because there's just tons of podcasts about marketing,
absolutely, but
not global marketing. And as we know, global marketing, is a different animal. Like, there's so many more issues involved that you have to think about. And so I thought, well, okay, so if no one is doing a podcast about global marketing, maybe that's a sign I should maybe try launching one myself.
Yeah.
And it was, again, like a really steep learning curve, because I'd never done anything like that before. But I thought, I'm just going to try doing this, and it's an experiment, and I have nothing to lose, basically. So I launched it. I launched with 10 episodes. This was back in 2016. I recorded 10 episodes in advance with people that I had connected with by that point, including people like Renato Beninato and some other people that are well known in localization circles. And I launched it, and yeah, it's been going ever since. It was a weekly podcast. This year in 2021, I'm going to have to scale back a little bit and make it every other week. But so far, it's been weekly. And one thing that I have realized in doing it is it's this interview format, right? Where you are connecting with people in advance, asking them to be on your show, explaining the mission of the show. And I've almost never had anyone say, no, I'm not interested, right? Everyone's always like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that, right? So I've found that this interview format is a fantastic way of networking, of building your network with people who are thought leaders in your industry or in industries adjacent to yours. And because unlike meeting someone at a conference where you kind of briefly chat and exchange business cards back in the day, and now you kind of connect on LinkedIn, and then maybe you don't see them or hear from them ever again, or if you see them in your LinkedIn feed, you go, oh, that's the first connection. where did I meet this person again? I can't remember now. I'd have to go back and figure that out. With a podcast interview, you now have this connection on a much deeper level. You've had this meaningful conversation, and in fact, you've created a piece of content around this meaningful conversation. So it's a win-win, and so it creates a lot of goodwill, on both sides. And so now you have this really high-quality contact in your network that you, in my experience, you tend to stay in touch with over time, right? These are people who now, all the people I've interviewed are now people that I would feel comfortable reaching out to, and vice versa. And that actually happens, on a regular basis, where I hear from someone I interviewed a while ago. They go, you know what? I was talking to someone just the other day, and your name came up, and your podcast came up, and it occurred to me this person would be like a great guest for you. Let me introduce you. And that's how I've been getting a lot of my guests now. So I know this is, something that people wonder about. How do I get on a podcast? Find a podcast. Yeah, just network and find a podcast that's actually really, really aligned with your mission as a professional, whether you're a freelancer or a consultant or a business leader. Find the podcasts that actually are totally in alignment with your own mission,
goals, and
and that's the key, really.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the guests and how to get on a podcast. And so what are you looking for in a guest, and what type of topics do you discuss on the show? The Worldly Market Podcast is a podcast that Vistatec proudly sponsored and has been sponsoring for a while. So we would be curious, I'm sure, for our audience who wouldn't know it yet and who'd like to tune in, what type of topics do you discuss, and what are you looking for in a guest?
Yes, well, first of all, I have to say the sponsorship by Vistatec has been much appreciated, and so I hope to continue that relationship. That is a good question. How do I choose because what I found, I don't know if it's because of the pandemic, and in 2020 kind of everything went virtual, but I feel like there's a whole new industry that sort of sprung out of the ground around podcast agents. So their job is basically to book their clients onto podcasts. So I'm hearing almost on a daily basis now, I hear from podcast agents who are basically emailing anyone and everyone who has a podcast, a business podcast, and who does interviews, who has an interview format, trying to get their clients onto the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost never a good fit, because what they are obviously doing is they're just sending a template email to any podcaster they can find. They can sort of identify, probably through LinkedIn or something. And so now I have a template response, which is like, thanks for your inquiry. I appreciate it, but your client is actually not a good fit for my podcast. They would be much better served by a podcast that is focusing on more general, digital marketing topics, or more general entrepreneurship topics. So my podcast is actually very niche, which is a good thing from my perspective, because my goal has never been to, it's not my business model. It's not how I try to make a living. It's how I put myself out there and build build brand awareness for Verbaccino, basically. So it's content marketing is what it is. So I have to be very selective about the guests that I have on the podcast now. It's really an active curation, right? It's choosing the guests that are going to be able to bring the best value in terms of content, in terms of knowledge that they can share with the audience for my target audience. And my target audience is, from Vistatec's perspective, is the clients of the localization industry. It's or more specifically, it's the potential clients of the localization industry. So those who maybe have never heard of localization before and have everything to learn about, what's involved. And not just localization, because it is a podcast about global marketing in the most general sense. So I also talk about things like, international SEO. I talk about things like, internationalization of software or websites. I talk about, web globalization best practices. I talk about intercultural communication. I talk about, how do you build a global team successfully? I talk about, marketing trends in specific countries or specific regions. I talk about global digital trends. Who's using which social network where in the world, and what are they using it for? Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things. So it's global marketing in the widest sense of the word, and localization is definitely a big part of that, because I naturally gravitate towards the localization industry. I feel like that's where I would have landed if I'd known about it sooner. So now part of my mission is to educate people outside the localization industry about what it is and why they need it if they're planning on expanding internationally.
Absolutely, and very useful. So thank you. And you're also a very busy marketer. So you mentioned you're involved. You've got, Verbuccino, the podcast, but you've also joined Bubble in October 2020 as head of content localization. So you lead the agency's global brand building services. So tell us a little bit about the organization, your current role for audience who maybe wouldn't know Bubble. Tell us a little bit about Bubble and what you do.
Yeah, so Bubble is another one of those cases where someone reached out to me and said, you should meet this guy, because we were just talking and it occurred to me he would be a great guest for your show. So that person who I had previously on my show was Chris Rolfe, who is well known in localization circles as sort of an expert in international SEO. And the person he wanted to introduce me to was Neil Sheth, who is the founder and CEO of a digital marketing agency called Bubble. He's based in London, and at first I was like kind of skeptical. I was like, okay, well, I'm looking at the Bubble website and I don't really see the global angle, right? He clearly knows what he's doing, in terms of digital marketing services, but like, where's the global angle here? I'm not sure. So we had a chat, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. He really knows his stuff, like when it comes to optimizing content for global reach. And country-specific reach, so ISEO again. And so I had him on the show. It went really well. We ended up chatting, and he ended up interviewing me for my own podcast, which was kind of a fun reversal of roles. Mm-hmm. And long story short, we ended up deciding to partner with each other. So we're now sort of informal, I guess, partners. And what he brought me into Bubble to do really is to launch the global brand building division, if you will, of his agency. So Bubble has always worked with clients on both sides of the Atlantic, just by virtue of their composition. They've always had clients in the UK, obviously, where their headquarters is, but also in the US, because mm-hmm. they also have people like Chris Rolfe partnering with them. And so they have clients on both sides of the Atlantic, and they've always done localization of content and of SEO, in the sense that, there is, as we all know, there's a big difference between content that's optimized for the US and content that's optimized for the UK, for instance. So it's English, but you still have to localize it. So their team is really good. They understand localization. And so now what they're trying to do is scale that to include other languages. And so the core offerings at Bubble, in terms of the types of services that they offer, the core pillars, I guess you could say, at Bubble are copywriting, and more specifically optimized mm-hmm. copywriting, mm-hmm. SEO, and so that includes international SEO. And the third pillar would be social media management, social media strategy and social media management. So now my role at Bubble basically is to scale that to include languages beyond English, or different varieties of English, right? So it's early days, and I'm still kind of building that division of Bubble. So right now what I'm doing is a lot of business development, but ultimately my role there will be sort of at the level of strategy, content strategy, and making sure that the clients at Bubble who are in that process of internationalizing their content and expanding their brand to new markets are well taken care of. And so again, the focus is on multilingual copywriting, ISEO, and down the road, and I'm not quite into this part of it yet, but offering things like multilingual in-country social media management.
Very important, yeah. And we're talking about global and English speakers in the UK and the United States. You said like today almost 93% of users are based outside of North America. 75% are non-English speakers. So obviously we've seen more and more large US companies expanding internationally. And of course, language and cultures are involved in these decisions. So what are your thoughts on this? We're talking about, especially talking about these languages and yeah, what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy. Like I'm based in North America, and we're being in Canada, we're very aware of the US. It's our largest trading partner, and vice versa. And we're always very aware of what's going on there. Because I guess I'm half European, you could say. That's where my roots are. I'm also very connected to the European I guess mentality, especially German and the German market. But I mean, these days, when you take a step back and look at the statistics, like for instance, I encourage everyone to go check out the latest edition of the Digital 2021 report that Simon Kemp just put out. Simon Kemp is the CEO at a consultancy called Kepios. So together with Hootsuite and We Are Social, which is also a digital agency, every year they put out this global digital, I think they call it a global digital stat shot or global digital report, basically, where they collect data, the latest data on internet usage, and that includes, social media usage, e-commerce usage, and mobile. The mobile angle in all this, and they basically report what the latest numbers are, right, in terms of who's using the internet, where, for what, on which channels, what are they doing on the internet exactly, and what are the trends, what are the global trends, and then they also break it down country by country, and it's absolutely fascinating, and it really drives home the point that North America is just, in terms of numbers of internet users, is such a small percentage. Like it's less than 8% at this point of the total global internet population, right? And it's countries like obviously China but also India, and then huge parts of Africa, where the internet adoption percentages are still surprisingly low, and there's still so much growth. There's so much room for growth still in terms of numbers of people who still have to come online, who are not yet on the internet but will be. That's where the growth is happening, right? And that's so when I say North America represents less than 8% of the global internet users, that percentage is actually going to keep shrinking, right? Because demographically, it's places like Asia and Africa where, and Latin America, where the population is growing in any case, is growing fastest. But those are also the places where there's the most need to catch up in terms of the population getting online for the first time. And when they do get online, of course, it's usually on mobile first, or mobile only, right?
Yeah. You also say that to be successful in the digital age, in general, brands need to reach out to people where they are in the local language in preferred channels. And that they must demonstrate cultural intelligence. Can you expand a little bit on this as well? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people getting online for the first time are doing it via social networks, right? Whether it's Facebook, whether it's WeChat, there are entire ecosystems now on social networks that people kind of live inside of now, and they don't really go outside of those ecosystems anymore. So if you're not on those channels, if you're not on those networks that your target customers are, you're not going to connect with them. It's as simple as that. And the other thing too is, well, especially now that we're all in lockdown, a lot of us are, in lockdown, and a lot of things have moved into the virtual space in terms of commerce. If you don't have a digital brand presence, now's the time to now's the time to work on that. Yeah, now's the time to fix that, because that trend, it's sort of been accelerated obviously by the pandemic, but a lot of commerce is now happening online. A lot of networking is happening online, obviously, if you're in a B2B space. And a lot of purchases are happening online, and a lot of purchases are happening more and more, not so much in North America maybe, but in Asia certainly, and other parts of the world. A lot of purchases, a lot of commerce is now moving to social. So these are trends that, like, depending on which industry you're in and who your target market is, where your target market is, and who your customers are, those are all things you really need to keep on top of and pay attention to. And so reports like this global digital 2021 report are just gold, right? Because first of all, it's a free report, so everyone should go check it out. But also it really shows you how different regions are, how different regions use completely different networks,
of course,
for different purposes even, right? So you need to be where your customers are, and you need to be speaking in their language. That's where cultural intelligence comes in. You know, it's nice to localize things from a distance, but if you don't have someone to do at least some quality control on the ground in that market and tell you, yeah, no one talks like that here, you know, so maybe you want to tweak it this way or that way, or tone of voice is wrong given your target market. You know, if you're talking to Gen Z, they don't talk like that, right? So you might want to tweak that. Or if you're trying to address business clients in this market, you're going to have to step it up a notch. People are much more formal in this part of the world. They don't introduce themselves by their first name. They really put an emphasis on titles, that type of thing. So there's so much to learn, and so cultural intelligence is huge. And depending on the market you're entering, there's people in country who can really help with that.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you cannot miss this. And you're talking about going global and helping brands go global. But with with all of your work for the podcast and your organization Verbatino, you've won a community award with the Think Global Forum. And the Think Global Awards with your tremendous work, really, should I say. So how did you feel about this? And obviously it's connected to everything you've been doing for a number of years. So tell us.
Oh, I was thrilled. It came completely out of the blue. I think at the time the award ceremonies were somewhere on the West Coast, and I'm in Toronto. And I remember at the time thinking, like, I had no idea I was even sort of in the running for this award. So I had sort of thought about going to the award ceremony, but it was just so far away, and I was kind of committed to other things. And I just thought, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to. But now, in retrospect, I should have gone because I won this award in absentia, and it was such a thrill to find out and receive this award. And yeah, a total honor. Yeah, it's just and I love that I won in the community category, because I do feel like the whole idea behind the podcast, yes, it's a content marketing platform for Verbatino, but it's also, to me, it's also a way of building a community around this mission that I'm very passionate about, right? Which is building awareness of, you know,
global marketing.
Yeah, global marketing, global localization. What does it take, right, in this day and age? What does it take to build a global brand? It's a very different ballgame from even 10 years ago, right? And it keeps changing. So it's fascinating. And there are so many cool people like yourself who work in this area. So I'm just really passionate about shedding a light on this industry, and making sure that people who need it, whether they realize it or not, are made aware of it, and to demystify it for them, so that they don't feel intimidated by it. Because it's full of really great, friendly, welcoming people who just want to help, and who do what they do out of passion quite often. So, and out of a love of culture and language. And I just want to make sure that that localization and globalization, because globalization is a word that has had some negative connotations at times outside of, you know, the localization industry. And I just feel like globalization in the sort of widest sense of the word it's a thing that's not going away, right? We're so connected now through the internet, and that's not going to go away now. So we have to find a way to collaborate. And in fact, great things happen when we collaborate. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to best do that, and finding the right people and tools to facilitate that. And I'm really passionate about promoting that idea to people who have yet to discover it or embrace it fully.
Well, thank you very much. That's very well said. But you're not just how can I say, not limited to just the podcast Verbuccino and Bubble. You also are very much involved in women localization in Canada. So you must be very, very busy in conferences. But it's fantastic. You're also leading a chapter in Canada. And I understand that in March of 2019, you were named as one of the leaders of this new chapter, this Eastern Canada chapter, if I may say. And if I'm quoting correctly, the goal of Women Localization Eastern Canada is to bring together professionals involved in the localization industry across Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces, and to connect them to the wider women in law community, which is obviously very much global. So tell us a little bit about the chapter.
Yeah, so I have a friend here in the Toronto area, Kathrin Bussmann, who some people might know. She's the head of Lingua Greca. She's a Greek Canadian. And we had met, I can't even remember now how we met, but I guess I was trying to find who else in my neck of the woods here in Ontario and Toronto specifically, is working in the localization sector. And she was one of the first people who got onto my radar because she's very active on social media. And so we kind of connected, and, we were both talking about how we'd both been to some local world events, and how we were both aware of women in localization, and we were so impressed with that organization, and we were we saw what they were doing and how chapters were popping up everywhere, and they were growing, and it just seemed like such a cool idea and a really worthwhile organization to be a part of. And we were lamenting the fact that we didn't have a chapter here in Canada. Mm-hmm. So then we thought, okay, well, why don't we launch a chapter here in Canada? So we got in touch with the headquarters, the global headquarters. And they were just putting in place at the time, standard operating procedure around accepting, applications for new chapters and that. So it took a while, but we eventually got the green light to launch our chapter. So Kathrin and I, in 2019, co-founded Women in Localization Eastern Canada. And the rest is history. I mean, we're building it. We're still sort of in the growth stages, and it's still relatively early days. And of course, the pandemic kind of threw a bit of a wrench into our plans, because, as you probably know, Women in Localization is all about bringing people together at live events in person so that they can meet and get to know each other and network and learn from each other. So all that's had to, go virtual, which is, has its own advantages, frankly, because now what we're finding is that the events that we're planning with our chapter, because they're virtual, we have people from all over the world join us for the virtual event, right? Which is really cool. And, vice versa, we are able to join other chapters events too. So in that sense, it's been nice, because we are really feeling more included in the global community of women in localization than we otherwise might have. And we were learning, I guess, at a faster pace of what's possible as a chapter. So it's been really cool. But we have lots planned this year, and it's been really rewarding to see how it's grown. Like most of us are either in Toronto or in Montreal. Mm-hmm. We have some members in Ottawa. The next step will be to keep growing in those cities, but also expand, beyond those 3 core cities. When we launched, we thought about making it the Canada chapter, but Canada is such a big country, right? Yeah. That having people join from Vancouver, like you get into, like we have so many time zones that at some point you have to say, okay, what is practical here? Yeah. Let's make it like Eastern Canada. But that does include, the Atlantic provinces. So we're gonna try to recruit more people from those areas, because we know that there's people working in translation and localization, you know, across our region here. So there's still a lot of work to do, but it's exciting.
It's exciting. It sounds very much exciting, yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the pandemic, and obviously, you know, it's been extremely tough on so many different levels for everyone. How has it been for you working from home in the past year? And I'd like to discuss a little bit, you know, a few different aspects and what this pandemic has brought us, let's say, in terms of like changing the way that we work and live.
Well, for me, it hasn't really changed much because I've always worked from my home office, which you see here. So that hasn't changed. But what I think will have changed by the end of all this is that there's going to be a much higher acceptance of remote work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for people who are on global teams, this may not be anything new, and especially in the localization world, it's not revolutionary by any stretch of the imagination. Many people have been working remotely for a long time. But I think the tools to do that are getting better every day, you know, because now there's a real need to make these tools as productive as possible, as user-friendly as possible. And I think that, you know, both on the client side and on the vendor side, there's going to be a much higher tolerance for people, team members being in remote locations, and that not being a barrier to getting the job done and getting it done just as well. In fact, you know, arguably there's some advantages if you have people in different locations, because you get perspectives, you know, in-country perspectives that you wouldn't otherwise get. Yeah, I think, and, you know, when it comes to networking, you know, whether it's just one-time kind of, you know, webinars or virtual conferences, I think we're going to see more hybrid models where people can join either in person or virtually, and somehow the event organizers accommodate that in different ways. And I think that's a good thing, because it kind of democratizes the whole conference circuit, right? It used to be that, you know, not everyone could take the time off or had the resources to attend all these events. And I think it's become much more accessible, and I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, no.
So that's the silver lining. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of from a marketer point of view perspective, have you noticed any difference in the trends? Obviously, everybody's working from home and using different tools. Have you noticed any difference, and what do you see, you know, up and coming for, you know, 2021 and onwards? What would you say?
I think it's become more important than ever for brands to really, really figure out what their positioning is. Because now that everything's gone virtual, and companies are realizing that, oh, okay, we really got to step up our digital game, you know, our digital branding, our digital marketing, our digital outreach. People on the receiving end of those campaigns are just being bombarded, right?
Yes.
And so you got to be really strategic. You got to really take a step back and think, okay, what's my positioning? Like, how am I really differentiating myself from my competitors? Because otherwise I'm just part of the noise. So what makes me unique? What am I pitching here, and why? How is that unique? Like, just as an example, I'm getting a lot of pitches, whether it's on LinkedIn or in my email, in my inbox, or just generally on social media, by vendors on the localization side, who, all different kinds of vendors, who are just pitching their services. Just, it's sort of this, what I like to call the spray and pray approach, right? So it's one message that they send out to everybody, and it's not tailored in any way.
Yeah.
So you're left thinking, so what? Like, how is this, like, how are you different from your competitors? Why should I care? Like, you're not showing me that you understand me. You want me to understand you, but you're not making any efforts to understand me, or to show me that you understand me, right? So why would I? Anyway, so I think what's needed now is, frankly, a more human approach, an approach where you lead with your added value, that you can bring to the table. And quite often that's the human element, right? There's a lot of vendors that offer more or less, you know, the similar sort of services, at least on paper, right? It looks very similar, but maybe their added value is the customer service that they have, right? That human contact, that genuine interest in getting to know the client's pain points, right? The client's concerns, like what keeps them up at night, what is it they're wrestling with, what is it that they really need beyond what you're offering.
Really,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And to build those relationships, I think there's a lot of people pitching a lot of things right now. There's not a lot of people who are willing to take the time to build relationships. And I think in a time when everything's being automated, everything's, you know, blasted at you like nonstop in terms of offerings and content, it's nice. What really differentiates companies is when the people behind the company show their face and show that they're willing to build relationships with their clients or their potential clients and really get to know them.
Much more engaging, yes, for both parties, and the clients, obviously.
Yeah.
And okay, well, that was very insightful, Kathrin. Thank you so much. Very useful, and for, I'm sure, anyone who would be interested in going global or knowing how to reach out in a human way, if I should say. So before we end this interview, what's on the horizon for you 2021? So you mentioned loads of conferences and a busy schedule, and is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today? And again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I know we went a little long here. It's probably because I'm a talker. That's what you get for interviewing a podcaster, right? We love to talk. What's on the horizon? Well, I mean, I am trying to build out my my roster of productized services at Verbaccino. So that's something that is sort of a work in progress. I want to break out sort of specific service offerings that can be that have like a finite scope of work, and that I can offer sort of as a one-off, to whether it's to LSPs who need to offer some sort of value add to their clients, or whether it's to marketing agencies that need some strategy with a global angle, which they may not already be offering. So I mean, stay tuned. It's early days. I'm still kind of building out my productized services, or prefix services, as I call them on my website. I'm going to be onboarding some client projects, so that's exciting. Continuing to partner with Bubble. The nice thing about Bubble is, as I mentioned, Verbaccino is a strategic consultancy. So I help my clients pick the right service providers for the implementation part of the strategy, but I don't offer, like, I don't do the implementation myself. So it's nice to partner with a digital marketing agency like Bubble, who really understand the nuances of marketing to a global audience and country-specific audiences, and who can help with implementation. So the nice thing about working with them is that then I have, you know, the client, from a client point of view, everything is sort of under one umbrella. You have a really highly competent creative content agency who is really focused on growing your brand organically through really high quality copywriting, SEO, and social media. But then you also have the global strategy in-house, as it were, if you need it. So that's kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to building that out more this year. And then I'm going to continue with the Worldly Marketer podcast. I'm going to, like I mentioned, I'm going to scale it back a little bit because it was kind of starting to take over my schedule. Like I'm a one-woman operation here at Verbaccino, right? So to put out a new podcast episode every week is a lot of work. And so far I haven't been able to bring myself to outsource any of the work involved in that, including things like editing. I kind of like to edit the interviews myself because I feel like it's a bit of an active curation in a way. I like to make sure my guests sound, you know, as good as I can make them sound. And so I I'm reluctant to give away that creative control. But I might have to do that in the future. But anyway, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it back to produce an episode every other week. Starting in February, at the end of February, I'm going to launch my 2021 season. And it's exciting. I have some really good guests lined up. So tune in for my 2021 season of the Worldly Marketer podcast. And last but not least, I just joined Clubhouse. Everybody's talking about Clubhouse. It's a new social network. The cool thing about Clubhouse is it's audio only. And so I was kind of roped into joining by some of my industry contacts in the localization industry. And I wasn't sure what to expect, but I have to say, I so far I'm very impressed, and I'm kind of excited because it's given me some ideas of how I can use it in a more strategic way. And one of those ways is that I'm launching, actually later today after our conversation, I have to get ready. I'm launching a new hopefully weekly thing called the Worldly Marketer Chat, which is going to be on the Clubhouse platform. It's going to be an interactive event, a weekly event, about an hour long every Friday. At least that's the plan right now. Stay tuned, it might change. But right now I'm looking at every Friday at 12 noon Toronto time. So that's Eastern time. And it's just a chance to meet in an audio only format, very spontaneously and organically, and just have a chat about topics that would come up naturally on the Worldly Marketer podcast. If I can manage it, I'm going to try to maybe bring on some special guests from the roster of interviewees that I've featured on past podcast episodes, or other people who are experts in the global marketing or localization field who can speak to very specific issues, and just have a nice chat with whoever happens to drop in. If you've been on Clubhouse, it's very organic. You can drop in and then leave again quietly. It's kind of like attending a conference in a way, but sort of audio only, and whoever happens to be there can jump into the conversation, and we can discuss these issues. And what I like about the idea of this is it gives me a chance, hopefully, to get to know some of my listeners, because the thing about podcasting, as you know, is you create these episodes, you're speaking into a microphone, maybe you're speaking to your guest as well, but you're not quite sure who else is kind of going to be touched by this piece of content, by this conversation, how it's being perceived. Sure. So it's a way to do some qualitative research, if you will, about how are these topics and how is my podcast engaging with people? How are the topics resonating with people? Are there topics I haven't even covered or haven't thought to cover that I should be covering? And just getting to know my fellow worldly marketers and the people in the industry who enjoy the podcast.
That sounds so exciting. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure our audience would be very curious and make sure to check the Worldly Marketer chat. So thank you for that, Kathrin. And it was a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm delighted that we went way over our average, if I may say, recording time. That's fantastic. It'll be, I'm sure everybody will be excited when we launch this episode, or we publish this episode, should I say. So thank you again.
That's my pleasure, Priscillia. Thanks again. And I look forward to talking again very soon.
Me too. So that's the end, unfortunately, already of Kathrin Bussmann's interview today for VistaTalks. Kathrin, again, is President-in-Chief Strategist at Verbuccino. She obviously a fellow podcast host of the Worldly Marketer podcast and head of content localization at Bubble. So please make sure to tune in again for more VistaTalks. You can obviously listen or watch all of our episodes, and what we'll be discussing more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you.